Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ke Xue San Hao. As the Philippine Navy sees an uptick in Chinese vessels in Manila's waters, including Beijing's the monster ship, Australia, Canada, the Philippines and the US announced 2 days of joint Navy and Air Force drills in the West Philippine Sea, or Manila's exclusive economic zone. At the same time, the Philippine Coast Guard has been tracking the movements of Chinese research vessel Ke Xue San Hao. For nearly 2 weeks and counting, it's moved around Sabina Shoal and other shoals west of the Philippine island of Palawan. This has included Manila-controlled Second Thomas Shoal, the home of grounded Philippine warship the Sierra Madre. We ask what could be behind this Chinese activity, and in the wake of Philippine bilateral maritime exercises, first with the US and second with Japan, and Australia and the US announcing regular exercises in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, we ask whether the Squad grouping may be on the rise and how this new mini-alliance differs from the Quad as the main security grouping countering China. Joining us today are Ray Powell, Stanford University Gordian Knott Center for Innovation, Sealight Director and host of Why Should We Care? Indo-Pacific podcast, and Yann-huei, Academia Sinica Institute of European and American Studies researcher. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show today. Okay, Ray, let me come to you first. So, first of all, this announcement by the 4 nations, Australia, Canada, the Philippines and the United States, 2 days of Navy and Air Force drills in Manila's economic zone. How significant is this development? What message does it send to China?
Well, actually this has been kind of building for the last year and a half or so, where we've seen Manila begin to diversify its partners and allies to draw very close to not just the United States, but other U.S. allies. So we've seen not just those 3 countries, we've seen groupings that include France. Germany has shown a new interest. Japan, of course, just completed a bilateral exercise with the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea. So we've seen the Philippines essentially calculate that if they're going to stand against a very, very large and aggressive neighbor, they're going to need a lot of friends.
Professor Song, so, let's look at China's reaction. They've already reacted. Tell us what they've done.
Of course, they don't like to see the intervention, interference from the country outside the region. So they say that it's not good for the stability in the South China Sea. It's not good. Philippines, if you go to that direction, is a big risk regarding your security. So I think China doesn't like to see that. But
they've held their own drills, haven't they? Again, Navy, Air Force drills around Scarborough Shoal. And in the statement that they released, and this was reported by the South China Morning Post, they said that any disruptive activity, they say, is well under control.
From Chinese perspective, of course, they are under there monitor and control. But my thinking is that the Chinese People's Liberation Army will take more action, Coast Guard vessel will take more actions to counter the action from outside, make joint exercise and so on. Okay.
Now, Ray, we mentioned at the top of the show about the survey ship, the Chinese survey ship. At Sealight, you've been tracking its movements too. What have you found? What exactly is it doing?
So this is not a conventional survey, usually a bathyrythmic survey. It follows what we call a lawnmower pattern. So it sort of goes this way, and then it goes this way, and it is obviously mapping the ocean floor. And this is not what this survey has done. Instead, what it has done is it seems to have paid a great deal of attention to shoals and reefs, and it's been sort of circling around those. So what the nature of the survey is a little difficult to tell. On one hand, they could be very interested in where the shoals and reefs are. You've got ships that move through, submarines and things like that. On the other hand, this may simply be, may also be signaling, letting Manila know that, even while you're looking over here at Second Thomas Shoal or Scarborough Shoal, we have a lot of things going on and we could continue to sort of press our advantage in other places.
Okay, so a pressure campaign.
Yeah, and one specifically, a lot of these places are very close to the coast of the Philippines. I mean, often coming, say, within 60 or so nautical miles, even closer. So I think that also is of great concern to the Philippines.
And anything in particular with those choice of shoals, or just a geographical?
It seems to be pretty comprehensive. So all of the shoals that it's been showing interest in are those that are sort of to the the east of where their primary base at Mischief Reef is, in, sort of Second Thomas Shoal, Sabina Shoal, and then things that are even closer to the Philippine coastline. So, they are working very close to Philippines proper.
Professor Song, what kinds of surveys do, especially state-owned vessels, what do they engage in? And, is there a system where there needs to be permission for this sort of activity?
All kinds of marine scientific research activities can be conducted by a coastal state within its EEZ. But if the EEZ has the kind of overlapping disputed zone, maritime zone, then it's troublesome. You get some kind of permission from the other side. So regarding South China Sea, the EEZ claimed by the Philippines, China sent a research vessel to that disputed, overlapped EEZ, then we will see that kind of protest from the Philippine side. In particular, the Philippine government will accuse China of violating its sovereign right or jurisdiction in Philippines claimed EEZ. But without that kind of disputes, you are entitled all kinds of marine scientific research survey activities within your EEZ, provided that not for peaceful purpose of the use of the ocean.
Okay. Under the AUKUS trilateral security partnership, Australia will upgrade its aging fleet of Collins-class submarines by purchasing Virginia-class subs from the US and eventually build its own entirely new nuclear-powered submarines. Although AUKUS has never mentioned Taiwan, in April 2024, US Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell said the AUKUS alliance could act as a deterrent to China in the Taiwan Strait by working with submarines from other countries. Now, Ray, you mentioned submarines in terms of passing through or close by shoals. How important are Australian submarines, say, in any crisis in the South China Sea or Taiwan Strait?
Well, what makes this particular deal of such interest to all the parties involved and China, and in this case, including Taiwan, is that nuclear-powered submarines are capable of a much greater range and speed than diesel-powered submarines. So you can, if you're Australia and you're in the southern hemisphere instead of the northern hemisphere, you need to be able to deploy far forward and remain submerged in order not to be detected. So this definitely, this building up of its nuclear-powered submarine capability certainly gives the U.S. alliance structure more options in terms of being able to support a Taiwan contingency.
And so going back to the survey ships, is there any link there, do you think, between what they could be doing and submarines?
Well, I would say not necessarily on the AUKUS side. Perhaps again, if Chinese submarines are interested in operating in that area, they would certainly want to know what the obstacles are.
Okay, so and obstacles are
reefs, shoals, things that are not at the ocean floor but reach up above. So
right. Okay, Professor Song, do you have a view about the submarines, and also about the survey ship, what it could be doing? So
you are talking about the possibility of survey to make sure that you have the zoos for submarines in the disputed areas. But in my understanding is that they are nuclear-powered submarines sailing underwater in the South China Sea already, even in the Taiwan Strait. And then for Australians, the possible nuclear-powered submarines, I think take time, too early to say that. But for traditional submarines from United States, maybe from Japan, maybe Australia, have been navigating, sailing through the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait. I think they have that kind of cooperation, planning. If something happened in the Taiwan Strait, even armed conflict occur in the South China Sea. So that kind of possibility are there. But I'm kind of worried about the possibility of submarine collision between, for example, China and the other country, outside the region.
Okay. The Quad countries of the US, Japan, Australia and India announced plans to cooperate in strengthening the resilience of undersea cable networks as part of boosting cyber and maritime security in the region. The US has also pledged to assist in training over 1,000 telecom officials and senior executives. So, Professor Song, what do you think this program is in reaction to?
I think the competition for the undersea cable markets are on the rise between China and the United States. I call this a Sino-American cyber warfare. And recently, China's Huawei marine submission cable business changed name to Yann-huei Communications. According to Wall Street Report, Yann-huei Communications had installed undersea cables with a total length of 94,000 kilometers. So 134 undersea cable project items were completed in Africa, Middle East, South Asia, and Southeast Asia by Yann-huei Communication. So it's likely for China to compete against the United States and its allies, such as Australia, for a larger share in the global undersea cable markets. And there are other considerations, espionage, spying events, try to be stopped from the US, Australia, and they have that kind of program to do this.
Ray, what sort of security risk does the US worry about in terms of China being such a big part of this market?
Sure. I mean, we've seen the U.S. responding recently to perceived threats to its infrastructure. And in the digital age, infrastructure, of course, involves all kinds of things, including, say, 5G, where they've banned Huawei from a lot of things. They've looked at where are there Chinese-developed components to existing networks, particularly government networks. And so undersea cables are a logical extension of all that. And when you look at the potential for not just current covert gray zone operations that could be pursued through cyber means, but God forbid a future conflict, then the idea that you have an adversary who can easily or quickly reach into essentially your homeland and begin to turn things on and off or otherwise disrupt the kinds of things that make the country work, that's actually a pretty frightening thing. The U.S. has always thought of itself as being protected by two large oceans, but in the cyber age, not necessarily. And so if a potential adversary has a way to quickly reach in and cause that kind of damage, it's something that has to be addressed. And
the sorts of things that we're talking about, as well as switching on and off, as you said, stealing data, eavesdropping, are these also genuine concerns?
Absolutely, especially, I mean, of course, it could be right this minute, right? So right this minute, there could be bad actors, from a U.S. perspective, inside of U.S. networks. We've seen many, many times already where there have been significant data breaches, intrusions, other kinds of things that have already been documented, large amounts of data already taken. So yes, this is very much on the minds of U.S. policymakers.
And Professor Song, I mean, just thinking about it from the Chinese side, could they say, well, the U.S. could do the same for us?
Certainly, because action counter action, and according to your national interests, according to the accusation from the other country, you can do the same thing. Actually, I believe all of the countries are doing something to protect their national interests regarding data, regarding cable, undersea cable. They have planning to protect themselves. On the other hand, try to sabotage, try to cut other countries' undersea cables in terms of security consideration.
Ray, I mean, we started with the survey ships, so taking a look at a bigger area, not just within the EEZ and close to Palawan Island. China has been known, or it appears that there is data where many Chinese survey ships have been seen, even in the Pacific Islands around Palau, for example, and the fear there is that, they are mapping the seabed.
Right.
Can you provide us a broader picture of what you've been tracking perhaps recently?
Sure. I mean, they've had a lot of survey ships mapping the floor of the Indian Ocean, all the way to near the coast of Africa, as you said, in the Pacific Islands, out into Micronesia, Melanesia.
And what do we think that's to do with?
I mean, I think that undersea cables are certainly one of their considerations, as are submarines. So they are, and of course, the traditional use of these things in many cases has been, searching for energy and those kinds of things. But, I think undersea cables represent a massive vulnerability for almost every. They're extremely long, and all it takes is one break, right? So all you have to do is find the one place that's not protected, and so it is a major concern, I think, not just for the United States, but for China and for other major powers and for minor powers, because we're talking about a lot of these Pacific Islands. The only way that they can have regular internet connection or a regular, data connection is undersea. There just isn't enough space capability right now to make up for it all.
Now, Ray, turning now to Manila's resupply missions to the second Thomas Shoal to resupply the Sierra Madre ship there. There was a recent agreement between both sides, but then both sides disagreed about what the terms were. Now, you have a theory of what might actually have happened.
Yeah, so what I think probably happened based on how we saw both countries react is that both countries, both the Philippines and China, were motivated to try to turn down the temperature at Second Thomas Shoal, especially after the June 17th incident, where we saw bladed weapons brandished by some of the China Coast Guard members against the Philippine Navy personnel there. We saw punctured boats. We saw a Philippine Navy SEAL lose a thumb. And this was right after President Marcos had made a very public speech at the Shangri-La dialogue, in the keynote address, essentially calling the death of a Philippine sailor in one of these incidents a red line for Manila. So I think the stakes had sort of reached a level where both countries just felt like it needed to be turned down. And so the problem was that both countries had made such strong statements up until now that for either of them to be seen to back down would basically be very difficult to sell to their own people or the other people that are watching. So it seems to me what happened was the Philippines refused to put in language that would suggest that they were submitting to China's jurisdiction over Second Thomas Shoal. China allowed that to happen, but sort of reserved the right to put out in their own messaging, but that's exactly what the Philippines did. So they have these competing messages, and the language of the agreement has never been made public. And that may be by design at this point, because the last resupply actually did go off without incident, even though both countries were still having this war of words. They may both have just concluded that it's better to have a war of words than actually to have open conflict on the high seas.
But one of the conditions that China said would essentially put over this agreement was that there would be advance notice and on-site inspections. So when this successful resupply actually happened, what do you think occurred?
I think most likely, based on what I've been able to glean from the public statements and such, was that the Philippines let them know when they were in the area. So they did not give, as was originally proposed by China, say a couple of days of advance notice, ostensibly almost asking permission, but simply said when they were coming in, that they had announced that they were coming in to do the resupply. There was ship-to-ship coordination. What was said between the ships has never been released, but that seems to be the most likely answer to the question. So to some degree, that China can say it was advanced coordination. For the Philippines, they can say, well, look, we talked to other ships when we're in the water. And again, they can both kind of spin it in their own way.
Very interesting. Out of the US-Australia 2+2 strategic dialogue on August 7th came the announcement the US and Australia will hold regular exercises in Manila's EEZ, while Japanese forces would increase exercises with US Marines out of Darwin. Now, on August 1st, the Philippines and US navies conducted a joint exercise inside Manila's exclusive economic zone. This was followed the next day by the Philippines and Japan holding their first joint military exercises also in that EEZ. What's the significance, Professor Song, of this, all this activity and this timing now?
Well, in recent months, we have seen that kind of tension, confrontation between China and the Philippines increasing, growing. And it might trigger that point to have open armed conflict in the area surrounding Second Thomas Shoal. So So because of this kind of confrontation, this kind of possibility of conflict, so U.S., Australia, Japan are trying to step in to show their worries and to have that kind of a bilateral exercise in support of the Philippines' position. And have this kind of support, the Philippine side can adopt a much stronger action position against China. So that kind of things that's ongoing. We can see that more, and later maybe we can discuss the other joint military exercise among the Philippines and other countries. So the timing is very important. And another one is the determination of those countries to support the Philippines' action to counter the Chinese aggressive moves in the South China Sea.
Yeah, so essentially what's happening is they're triggering the very thing that they don't want to happen, Ray. And, you know, these four countries, so Philippines, the US, Japan, and Australia, they've been given a nickname by a Pentagon official. It's called the Squad, and this happened, they were given that term after Lloyd Austin hosted the four defence ministers this year in May.
Yep.
However, the four did actually meet earlier the year before at the Shangri-La dialogue. So, you know, for you, what is the difference between the Squad and the Quad? Now, the Quad ostensibly is to counter Chinese aggression, and yet it seems that this Squad is perhaps performing that more. Are we going to see essentially the Squad overtake the Quad?
I think they're just two different animals. So the Quad has never marketed itself as something to counter China's aggression. So the Squad.
So where does that come from then?
So, I mean, well, you just sort of look at the countries involved and say, wow, they sure seem to have a lot of common interest in countering Chinese aggression. That must be what they're doing. But you've seen actually very little happen in the way of, I mean, it's not just security for the Quad. You've seen that they cooperated on COVID response, for example, you know, in vaccine distribution, those kinds of things, economics. So they've got a much broader array. Probably the one thing the Quad does in security is the Malabar exercise, which pre-existed the Quad, but then, you know, Australia was allowed to participate in making it a Quad exercise. The Squad has been born a security exercise or a security grouping, and that, I mean, when you see the defense ministers being essentially the nuts and bolts of the Squad, that's essentially the message that's being sent, and it's being sent very specifically in response to this threat.
Okay, so Beijing has warned Manila against the growing involvement of the US in the modernization of Philippine forces, saying the recent announcements of Washington's $500 million investment would destabilize the region. It said that the US was not part of the South China Sea conflict and that it had no right to interfere in the affairs of Beijing and Manila. And China has used similar warnings against Japan after Tokyo condemned the June 17th Chinese aggressions against the Philippines. Professor Song, so let's analyze, you know, the narrative that China is spreading here.
It's clear it has been a consistent position of China opposing the interference from the outside countries. And it has been Chinese position that it's not good for the Philippines in terms of your security. It's not good for maintaining stability in the South China Sea, and it might escalate tension in the region with that kind of a foreign intervention.
Ray, is there a risk of China's narrative that, you know, there are blocs acting against it, that it's being encircled? Is there a risk that this does appear to be happening?
China created that risk. China created that risk simply by its own aggression, right? So if you are the Philippines, you are a smaller country with a relatively weak maritime force facing a much larger country with an extremely strong maritime force that has been aggressively encroaching into your own maritime zone and has already declared that almost everything in the West Philippine Sea belongs to China. So what are your options, right? China's recommendation is that the Philippines should simply essentially make its best deal to accept China's jurisdiction over the entire West Philippine Sea, and China would then grant rights as it chose into what would then be Chinese waters. Philippines obviously doesn't want to do that, and so its options, it's the first thing on its list of options is to look to the one country on the planet that it has a treaty alliance with, and that's the United States, which happens to have the ability to show up with $500 million in military aid. So it would be foolish for the Philippines to turn that down.
We're going to have to end it there. I'm sorry. We've run out of time. Thank you so much, Ray Powell and Song Yann-huei, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for Taiwan Plus.
Taiwan Plus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.
At Connected, we believe in the power of dialogue. It's not just about the headlines, it's about finding common ground. Join the conversation.
Connected with Divya Gopalan on Taiwan Plus.
We bring you stories from Taiwan.
Every day of the week.
Our reporters travel the nation.
Exploring the issues that matter to you. News from here in Taiwan and around the world.
What's up, Taiwan? On Taiwan Plus.